Hey guys, I'm about to bring you my excellent conversation with new Bulwark employee Will Sommer, but I wanted to flag that this whole show was taped on Tuesday, which means that the whole discussion around the economy and tariffs took place before Trump's new tariff regime came down this week. So keep that in mind as you listen. But obviously, as the economic effects of tariffs trickle down across the country, you can bet we're going to be talking about them soon. But for now, here's my conversation with Will Sommer. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Focus Group podcast. I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark, and this week is a bit of a potpourri of the ongoing Trump horribles. First, we're going to get some quick reactions to the biggest story of Trump 2.0 so far, Signalgate, and whether or how much voters care about it. Next, because Donald Trump is threatening to run for a third term, we're going to check in on his base's attitude toward him running for this third term and the base's general attitudes toward Trump and the rest of the MAGA-verse. Thankfully, my guest is well-versed in that world. That guest is Will Sommer, the new author of the Bulwark newsletter, False Flag, and author of the book Trust the Plan, The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Unhinged America. Hey, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so coming on this show is a bit of a hazing ritual for the new Bulwark hires, but thanks for being here anyway. You have to be.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled. I mean, I think there's a lot of great topics to discuss, so yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here in general. Okay, so one defining feature of this last election was that a soft version of conspiratorial thinking went mainstream. Like, we saw it all over the place. It wasn't just sort of confined to the fever swamps of QAnon. And so how has the right-wing media ecosystem touched the rest of the culture over the last few years? Because I feel like it used to be kind of isolated and then did it metastasize? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of became mainstream on the right, whatever. I mean, there was when I started covering this stuff in 2016, every so often something would happen. People would say, like, who's this weirdo? You know, explain this guy's deal. But now we see, I mean, the idea that, like, the majority of the Republican Party believes a presidential election was stolen. I mean, that's so banal to us at this point. But I mean, the idea, I think, pre-2020, I just think these conspiracy theories have become really common. That we have, whether it's about vaccines or, anything sort of the moment can be, there's a conspiracy theory to explain it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that over the period of time I've been doing focus groups, I have watched. I've actually developed a theory about it. You may have seen me do it. It's called the Republican Triangle of Doom, which is the toxic and symbiotic relationship between the elected Republican officials, the right-wing infotainment media, and the voters. Because your point about the 70% of people who believe the election was stolen, that's not something that happens just. You don't start that way, right? The election's not over and 70% of Republicans believe it was stolen. It happens by there being sort of a mutual reinforcing way in which some segment, the MAGA faithful, demand, right, that they say the election was stolen. They're like, I demand this from my elected leaders. So the elected leaders start to say, yeah, well, looks fishy. And you get people like Ted Cruz or Kevin McCarthy, people that are seen as more mainstream Republicans saying, yeah, I think that this election was stolen. And then that bleeds over to another section of voters that says, well, if Kevin McCarthy says the election was stolen, maybe something must be, happening. And also those elected officials need the right-wing infotainment media because that gives them access to their voters, especially their most fervent ones. Now it becomes this radicalizing, reinforcing mechanism.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, you think about these issues that sort of start out in a non-political or a bipartisan way and then become very polarized. Like, I think of Ukraine, for example. Like, immediately after the invasion, there were so many Republicans, even a lot of Republican voters. I mean, the vast majority were supportive of U.S. aid to Ukraine, stuff like that. And then you start to see a couple people in the right-wing media who often took very pro-Russia stances already kind of start picking away at it. And then over the years, it picks up steam where it becomes sort of accepted on the right that it's like, oh, no, we don't support Ukraine. That is sort of the reflex position. And so in these ways, I think you can see, just a personal personal story. I was a young Republican long ago, and
You and me both, brother.
and I would listen to like talk radio and stuff, and I would see like the crazy stuff they were talking about. And for me at the time, it didn't seem that crazy, but I mean, it was like Michael Savage would say like, we got to like nuke China and stuff like this. And this was, fourth, fifth most popular talk radio host in the country. And I thought, then I look at Congress and they're talking about like tax cuts, deficit reduction. And I thought there's this gap here between what the base wants and what talk radio is telling it wants and that they're really whipped up about, and then what Congress is putting in place, the Republicans. And so then I thought, at some point there's going to be something's got to give. And what it was Trump, with someone who actually arrived and said to the base, yeah, you can have whatever you want.
That's a good point. I mean, I used to talk about this a lot, but I actually haven't thought about it in a little bit. The world that we inhabited as young Republicans, and I'm not going to ask you how old you are. I actually don't want to know how much younger than me you are.
Sure.
But there was always a recessive gene in the Republican Party that you kind of had to give a sop to, right? This is your Rush Limbaugh listeners. It was Pat Buchanan, and then like eventually sort of Sarah Palin. Sometimes we call them populists, whatever. But there was always this part of the Republican Party. And at some point, it did become the dominant gene in the Republican Party. And there's a theory that I'm not entirely sure whether I think this is exactly right, but I certainly think there's elements of truth to it, that both parties had kind of had their crazy people. Like when I was coming up as a young Republican, it was the Democrats who were kind of the anti-vaxxers. It was like people, I would think of them as sort of, I don't know, people living in remote places in Arizona who were like anti-vaxxers and that would say there's, weird things in all the food, so don't eat anything. And they were super anti-establishment. And it feels like what's happened is all of those people have realigned so that the Republican Party now contains everybody who's interested in conspiracy theories. And the Democratic Party, they're conspiracy theories. I'm trying to remember what really good ones they might have these days. And I'm not coming up because they've got sort of they have the sort of college lounge talk that's different than the conspiracy theories that people like to marinate in on the right now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, people love to say, when I'm obviously covering conspiracy theories, people say, well, doesn't the left have a lot of crazy conspiracy theories too? The answer is not really, and certainly not at the level that it's been embraced by members of Congress or on MSNBC, stuff like that. And so I think you're right that, people with a sort of an anti-establishment or a distrust of the system, for the most part, have migrated over to the right. And in many ways, that's sort of a challenge to Democrats, because often these conspiracy theories arrive from a somewhat reasonable place of thinking perhaps corporations don't have our best interests at heart, things like that. And then it becomes, that's why they're creating these poisonous vaccines, or they're poisoning the food supply, stuff like that. And so there's often sort of a kernel of truth to it, and then it spins out into sort of RFK land.
Yeah, and RFK is a good example, right? Or Tulsi Gabbard. Like, these are all people who used to be institutional Democrats or Democrats of some kind that now politically feel more at home in the Republican Party because their extreme views are welcome there and they are no longer welcome in the Democratic Party. So you can see the shift happening sort of right in front of our eyes. So I want to listen to how Biden to Trump voters talk about the big story this week in The Atlantic about top officials, including the Vice President of the United States, using Signal, which is a commercial sort of messaging app, to plan a bombing on the Houthis. Let's listen.
The information wasn't destructive that got leaked. Nobody got hurt. The mission went the way it was supposed to go. Whether or not the information was classified, I do want them to investigate, as they should, but the left is, jumping on it as if it's the end of the world. This was their opportunity they've been waiting for. So it's all over the news. But one thing that it did show was that they, especially the vice president, they're putting America first. There was nothing in those secret messages that was hypocritical compared to what they say in public. And like I said, it went off without a hitch. I don't know why that reporter specifically was added. I mean, they said he has the same initials as someone else that may have been added or whatever, but like, he's like from the Atlantic, they hate Trump. Like, I don't know why he got added. So there's some questions about why was his information even in the guy's phone to begin with? but it's a big deal enough that it should be investigated, but it's not as big as they're making it seem.
That it was definitely a screw up, massive screw up. And I heard John Ossoff talk about since they noted all of the times of the bombings that the pilots could have got hurt. They could have backtracked about where the planes would be coming from and injured some of our guys over there. So in terms of that, that makes me uneasy and gives me pause. But the fact that nothing like that did happen, it went off without a hitch. I like it. Yeah. But it was definitely a massive screw up, and I don't like it. It doesn't need to be a thing in the future.
I actually do use Signal to talk to my son, and he does national security for the military. We don't talk about his job. It's just like, okay, I'm going to send you a package. And I think for just the regular military personnel that knows you're not supposed to put out any information out there, I think they should have known better. They should have known better. There should have been more of a understanding that, when you're speaking about any type of information, that it shouldn't just be out there in the atmosphere. And I want to say that those texts were still, they weren't deleted right away. They were still there. So, I mean, that's a huge national security issue. For me, I'm a mom. My son's in the military, and I know that he can't tell us the things that he does, and he knows that he can't say the things that he does. So it just makes sense that people need to, I'm sorry, but there needs to be consequences.
I thought when I first heard the news that it was not real, because at that level of security and branch of the government, I think you should have better sense than that, than to make that small mistake. That's like if someone messes up an order for you at Jimmy John's, but not to mess up something when it comes to national security. I'm not from the military or really have any background in it. And I just really got into politics and reading about and hearing about stuff this year. But still, I think someone should be held responsible. If it's not the person that put together the group chat, it should be the person that accidentally added his name, because that's a mistake that if they made it once, they can make it again.
All right. So, Will, there were 3 people in this group, surprisingly, who had heard nothing about the Signal chat fiasco. But the rest of them were kind of mixed there. You had some people who seemed to have got the messaging right from what the right wants them to think about it. Then there were other ones who just on their face thought it was a real problem and wanted accountability. But something like this happening to me is always an interesting study in how the right-wing messaging machine kicks into gear and sort of tries to shape something like this for their voters. What did you see in the wake of the Signalgate?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's these times that are so interesting where there isn't sort of a pat response to go to because it's something that's so strange. I mean, I think of like the Access Hollywood tape, things that are just you never could have imagined. And so people, at least for a couple of days, kind of struggle to come up with the messaging. In this case, obviously the administration's message shifted for a couple of days. We heard someone in the focus group there who said, well, the strike went off. No harm, no foul. No one was killed, and right, exactly. And so in that way, whatever, let's move on. And there was also a bit of, the Democrats are playing politics with this. I think this kind of recurs as an issue for voters who seem to support Trump, is this idea of kind of like both sides are the same, or like, Democrats might do the same thing, or it's kind of like a mud pit or something, it's the
Democrats are pouncing on this and politicizing it.
Exactly. On the other hand, I was interested to see that, and it makes sense that these are Biden to Trump voters, that other ones are saying, this is an issue, there should be an investigation, someone should be fired.
Yeah, I was sort of pleasantly, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but because it is such a blatant violation of our national security, and I think people's initial reactions were to be horrified by this. And I do think one of the reasons that you didn't get as many people, because I often do focus groups after a big event, and it's amazing to me how quickly sort of conventional wisdom can congeal on the right and a defense for whatever the thing is that Trump has done. And I think this time, because the administration itself didn't have one explanation, it had like 7. It was like Pete Hegseth was like, this was not classified information, or this is a lying reporter. And people were like, they already confirmed that this is real and true. And they were like, okay, different one. Now it's like, well, the plan was perfect, but we don't know how we got on there. Like, they actually did. There was 3 people who didn't know anything, and there were other people who knew quite a bit. And when something gets to that level of detail, you can see that a story like this is one where Democrats need to figure out how to continue to press on this, because they do have people who voted for Trump who don't think it was great. But I guess my question is, having watched Democrats try to sort of puncture the outer edges of the Trump coalition that are still open to persuasion, they've been great at that. They're not like Benghazi good at making something stick, or butthurt emails making something stick. So do you think, though, that this could be one of those things that they make stick if they keep driving it?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we see from those voters that there is some interest and sort of a feeling that, like, the story still has yet to play out, that we haven't gotten, like, the consequence that I think at least some of those voters seem to feel is warranted. It's interesting you bring up Benghazi, Emailgate, many other things. Because I remember I was thinking about this in light of the Signal saga. Even with those cases, even as someone who follows this stuff pretty closely, I would say, like, wait, what is like the theory of the case here about Benghazi? Like, what is it that Hillary Clinton supposedly did nefariously rather than perhaps incompetently or just unthinkingly? And you look into it, and it's like, well, that's not true. Like whatever the maximum version of culpability is clearly not going to be true. And yet they managed to drag these things on for years and years. Now, certainly, I'm sure if Democrats control the House, there will be a Signal investigation, and that helps a lot. But even now, I feel like the Signal thing is fading a little bit. The classic Trump defense of, don't admit anything, no one resigns, seems to have weathered the storm, at least for now.
Yeah, I mean, it is, they do seem to understand. And I would say people who are in the communications business are often very wary. Like, you want to kill a story like this. You want to put it to bed. You want it to go away. You don't want it to drag on. And I think they have a real instinct for knowing that if you fired somebody, it would raise this to another level of salience. Like those 3 people who haven't heard of this, when Pete Hegseth gets fired, maybe they do hear about it because it is much reported on, much opined about. It's funny though, you hit the weekend and it's like people reset. And then you also get Trump, who says, okay, so this is bad for us. We look like idiots. I know how to get out of this, though. I'm going to tell reporters that I am running for a 3rd term, and I'm going to get them chasing a different story altogether. Which brings us to the next thing, which is Trump tells Kristen Welker this weekend that there are ways he can run for a 3rd term in 2028, and he's not joking when he says this. We must take him literally and seriously on this particular point. So we have been trial ballooning this Trump 3rd term thing in the focus groups, specifically with Trump voters, for a while now. So I want to play some of the sound from a recent group of 2020 and 2024 Trump voters who are even more supportive of Trump than the rest of the GOP. Like, these are his base. We did like a very pro-MAGA group of voters. And we asked them about this. So this group splits between diehards who like want Trump to be king, Trump forever, and people who really like having Trump around, but they get sort of like squeamish and non-committal about the 3rd term thing. So let's listen.
King Trump. Shit, yeah, I'll sell more hats.
I think it's too soon to tell. I think there's a lot of things that are shifting, undoing a lot of the things that Biden did or his people did right before he left office. I'm speculating. I think this will all be for the good. Like the tariffs, for example, we got to see over time if we bring some of that industry back into the U.S. and we can add new jobs, and all that's going to take time. So, if things go the way that we're projecting, I would say, yeah, like if he turns things around and we get back on track, lower prices, the economy's doing great, I would definitely consider that. But, if this is all for naught, like we do all these shifts and changes and add tariffs and anger other countries and cause wars or something like that, I'm just going to the extreme. But then I would be like, okay, we might need somebody else to reshift or recalibrate instead.
at first I was like, oh, yeah. Initially, I was all for it, thinking, oh, yeah, that would be a great idea. But then I guess I was more now on the lines of, well, I guess I need to see where this goes before I could make that decision.
It's too soon. We have to see if it goes the way he says it's going to go. We all want to believe that that's the case and everything's going to pan itself out and it's all going to make sense as time goes forward. But does it? Will it? Can it? We don't know. So I guess ask me in 2 years and then I can give a definitive answer on should he be, or we need someone else to come in and make different changes.
I'm kind of on the fence. I kind of feel bad because he got the first term kind of interrupted with the pandemic and then not getting elected and then getting reelected. But honestly, I think it might have proven to be a good thing for him, because if he got elected the second time, I don't think he'd have the same fervor as he did now. So that second term, I feel, would have been a bit more muted by comparison for everything. But now he does have that fervor. So this is a good thing. And I want to see more of this fervor from any politician. But now that we actually have someone with this kind of fervor and this kind of momentum and just trying to do something and getting there, I want to see it continue. So that's kind of why I'm like half. But at the same time, we do have these laws in place, and I want to see somebody else take it over, whether it's Vance or somebody else, that will be like, yeah, I'll keep this train rolling, right? Because there's a reason why we have this in place. And, George Washington, our founding father set this up, as far as the what's the word I'm looking for? Not the law, the precedent. Thank you for actually doing that, right? And then it became law much later. So there's obviously a reason that we have that going for that precedent and for the laws now. But let's get somebody else good in there.
All right, Will, you just wrote a newsletter about this.
Yes.
I just read it before I came in here. And I want to ask you about this catch-22 that they put people like us in when Trump does one of these stunts. Because on one hand, they are trying to build an appetite. I mean, these voters, they're saying like, oh, wait. And they're not saying, well, the Constitution is very clear on this. They're sort of saying, let's wait and see how he does. And if he's really, no mention of his age, whatever. So like they're open to it if he's doing a great job. But then there's other people sort of in the conservative media ecosystem that tut at us if we take it seriously at all and say, how dare you think that our Constitution is so weak that, Trump could do this and you guys are all just getting baited. And I do think Trump picks his moments on some of these things. I do think it is part of trying to move to a different narrative. And yet, I also think the idea that somebody who has flouted every law that someone has tried to put in front of him and who has made it clear he's looking for whatever like legal ways he could try to get around this or find a loophole. I don't know. What should we be doing? How should we?
Yeah, I guess it's complicated, right? As you said. I mean, on one hand, we have seen people like Benny Johnson pulls out like a giant salt shaker for like the liberal tears. He's saying, oh, Trump's trolling, whatever. But on the other hand, and this is why the focus group's so valuable. Like you listen to these voters. And they're saying, I mean, this is like almost the equivalent of Trump saying, like, I want to be king, right? And if people said, what do you think of Trump being king? And they said, I don't know, let's see how he does. I mean, and these are frankly voters, I'm assuming, if they're hardcore Trump voters, who are not really going to be that, unless Trump plunges the country into a huge depression or something, that aren't really like looking that carefully at his performance, or they're going to say, in all likelihood, he did a great job no matter what. So, I mean, the idea that they're even giving like lukewarm support for the most part, it's pretty alarming to me. And I think there's a big contrast between how this is being treated among Republican politicians and in the media and how these voters actually feel about it.
All right, focus group listeners, have I got a podcast rec for you? In wild times like these, do you ever want to break the rules? I know it can be important to rethink some of the dumb rules that we follow for no good reason. Well, that's exactly what friend of the Bulwark, Glenn Galich, gets into on his show, Break Fake Rules. Here, Glenn and guests dig into the self-imposed rules that hold us back, particularly in philanthropy, to uncover which rules we should commit to breaking together for a better society. Just be sure to break fake rules in a cool way, not in an Elon way. Or, because it needs to be said, not in a spray painting other people's Teslas way. Or maybe I'm going to plan airstrikes in Yemen over Signal kind of way. You'll even hear from me and other insiders in politics, government, philanthropy, media, and more who are refusing to live by fake rules. If you've ever wondered why we live by certain rules or dreamed of what becomes possible when we do things just a bit differently, tune into Break Fake Rules. New episodes drop monthly wherever you get your podcasts. Trump could only do the sort of stolen election thing with the support of a huge swath of Republican voters. Like they willed it into being, right? It has taken as faith to the point where sometimes I have to deal with people in the democracy movement, and they'll be like, look at all these people who care about democracy in this latest poll. It says lots of people, and I'm like, those are a lot of Republicans who say that democracy is under threat because the Democrats have stolen the election from Donald Trump, not that they think Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And so the fact that there is like a medium-ish appetite from voters, Trump knows that, and like he is going to, whether he's serious or not, I mean, he would be very, very old, and I don't know. There's like a lot of, and it is flagrantly unconstitutional. Like it is there in black and white. You know what else there's there in black and white though? The idea of birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to change that. So like the idea that we are suckers for looking at it and being like, I don't know, we should probably have a plan to make sure that he can't actually do this, feels not as irrational as some people would like to make us feel.
Yeah, I mean, you think about 6 years ago or whatever when he started floating the idea of taking over Greenland, right? Classic shiny object distraction thing. And now look where we are. We're making like weird saber-rattling trips to Greenland, stuff like that, shaking up NATO. So the idea that, it may seem crazy, but Trump's also done a lot of other outlandish stuff that had never been done before.
Yeah, we should no longer be caught flat-footed in a failure to imagine, and to accuse those of us taking him remotely seriously of being unserious. I would like to remind people like that, Eric Erickson, that Trump himself is the one. It's just amazing to me when these guys screw up and you hear people saying like, oh, well, the Dems are all over them for it. Or Trump's floating the unconstitutional third term, and it's like, stupid Dems don't understand the Constitution. And I'm like, is that it, or does Trump not understand the Constitution? I think we know the answer to that. Okay. So in every focus group we do, we always do it the exact same way. We ask people, how do you think things are going in the country? And you just kind of took a shot at this because when we asked this hardcore MAGA group, how do you think things are going in the country? I actually did find the answers a little bit interesting because they didn't quite say, everything's awesome, I'm loving it, let's go. They were a little different than that. Let's listen.
I'm an entrepreneur. I guess you consider I'm transitioning because I'm unemployed. I was selling Trump merchandise for the last 8 years, but now that the election's over, I have to get a real job.
Okay. How's the transition going?
Pretty damn good. I'm not talking about transitioning sexually. I'm talking about work-wise, okay? I think they're improving. Prices are coming down just a fraction at the grocery store, but not like they need to be. And with all the bullshit, I call it, that the Democrats are trying to create and stir up, if you know somebody voted Democrat, you see them in public, you just want to grab them and beat the shit out of them.
I would say that they're progressing better. Definitely not where I would like them to be, but again, we're in the first 100 days of a new administration. So things are still kind of coming to fruition. Parts are getting into motion. I like kind of where the economy is heading. I don't think we're going to be where we think we're going to be just yet. I think it's probably going to take, I'd say, a year and a half, 2 years. As for just like domestic and foreign policy, I think that's also on a good uptick right now, just with, I think the improving situation in Ukraine and Russia, the improving situation over in the Gaza Strip, as well as, domestically, right? Just law and order, de-weaponization of the Department of Justice, illegal border crossings being down and getting illegal alien criminals out of here and reducing the inflow of fentanyl, into this country.
It's quite uncertain. I think it's trending in the right direction, but I think Trump's throwing a lot of rocks in the pond and there's a lot of waves going up and down. So it'll take some time to settle out and see the effects of his changes. But I think in general, I like the rocks he's throwing, and we'll kind of see how things just settle out over the next 3-4 months.
I believe it's not going to be as immediate as, the whole first 90-day thing that he was promising in the beginning. But like they all said, he's putting a lot of things in motion, a lot of changes, and, they're shocking and people are shocked by them. And so it's going to take some time to see the benefits of that. And I think it's going to take, like what they've all said, a good year to year and a half to really see things come to fruition and all of it play out.
I feel like Biden screwed up the world so much in the last term that now it's going to take a lot to correct it. So, and again, it's going to be a slow process and we're going to have to all be patient. But so far, I think it's been positive.
I mean, I really like how he's getting rid of the dangerous illegal immigrants. But in terms of prices, I wish that they would come down, because to me, that matters more on a daily basis. And at least here, I haven't seen any really difference like in stores.
I wish things would happen a little bit quicker, see a little bit more price decrease. But the accomplishments that I've seen since he's been up there are incredible. And I understand it takes a lot of time to undo the damage that was done, because it was quite extensive. So I'm thrilled with everything I'm seeing so far. And, they didn't build Rome in a day, so to speak.
So I actually thought this was really interesting. And it's consistent with a lot of the other groups that we've done with Trump voters, where they are happy with the action. They trust Trump and they will sort of make excuses, but they are sort of like, but I would like prices to go down. I would like the economy to improve. I would like inflation to be better. And you can see, and it's sort of, when I talked to a lot of Trump voters and listened to how they talk about the first term, and they were like, everything was amazing. It was the greatest time, before COVID, everything was incredible. And they are hedging a little bit, right? They're like, Rome wasn't built in a day. There was a lot of people in the group. It's not in here. They're like, it might take a couple years, which I think they're hearing Trump say could be a rocky transition. But I do hear just a lot of this concern about the economy. It shows up in the polling. What do you think? I mean, do you think if prices don't start going down sometime in the next year or so, that people like this could start not desiring Trump for a third term?
It's a good question. I think maybe a Biden to Trump voter, perhaps that's possible. I guess maybe my skepticism is from covering right-wing media so much and seeing what messaging I think will emerge. We're already seeing, as you said, like short-term pain, it's like remodeling your house or whatever. And now is that going to become in, 2027? Are we going to be hearing, well, just a little bit more pain, or we didn't know how bad the Biden economy was? And I mean, the reality is the prices aren't going down. Like, I mean, the inflation might slow, but the prices aren't going to go down. And I think that messaging has been promoted so much, the idea that like it'll actually become cheaper again, we'll have to see. But it is interesting that at least at this point there was like a little dissatisfaction, as you said, hedging. But I just imagine that in a few years there will be, in the same way that after the financial crisis it became, well, the issue was too many minorities and poor people were allowed to buy houses. That I think there's going to be some messaging that picks up, even if, let's say tariffs just shoot inflation up. I think there will be some way that at least hardcore Trump supporters can excuse it.
Can rationalize it. Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of this is a crass phrase, but Trump has the ability to sort of pee on a lot of these people and tell them it's raining.
Yeah.
And they will often, defend him in the face of that. I wonder, it is one thing when the economy is good, though, to lie to them. I wonder how many people stick with him if inflation does shoot up. Like if the tariffs really do, because I do hear this, and you're right, we've been talking to a lot of Biden to Trump voters, and so it's people who have not been, they're like more red-pilled than they are sort of people who've lived in the right-wing fever swamps for a long time. A lot of them are kind of like Joe Rogan-ish people. They went from Bernie to Trump. But like they talk about, I don't know, I was going to buy a car, but now I'm really worried. I don't think I'll be able to because of the tariffs. There was some tariff skepticism in this group. How does the right-wing media ecosystem deal with the truth of people are experiencing negative personal consequences at the grocery store, prices? Obviously, they blame it on Biden for now. And you can hear people in there, Biden screwed it up so bad, going to take a while to fix it. But if it doesn't get fixed, as you just said it won't, how long does he get to pee on them and tell them it's raining?
It's a good question. And, it's funny you say that. I also hate that phrase, but it's one that just comes up so much. It's so relevant to our times, right? So ultimately, you can't keep blaming it on Biden. In theory, maybe. I mean, this is what so many of the focus group questions are. How durable is that support for Trump, right? And I do think that I think in part, taking back to Signalgate, that was so effective because people imagine, I have Signal on my phone, they might say, I know how this works. But obviously the economy is so much more important and people deal with that much more in their day-to-day lives. At the same time, I mean, we'll have to see how much people buy the tariffs are building a new economy message. I think the messaging has been pretty muddled on that so far. Like, it seems like even people in the White House don't know exactly what this fabulous new economy is supposed to look like. So, I mean, that might be an opening.
Yeah, and maybe this is too deep on the tariff thing, but part of it is that the tariffs, like J.D. Vance could sit down here and explain annoyingly, but with some relative precision, about how the hollowing out of the Midwest and the manufacturing sector, how tariffs are going to force us to build more things here. But Trump, with tariffs for Trump, it's more just like, I would like a lever by which I can punish our friends and help our enemies or whatever whenever I want to, right? And he doesn't mind keeping people guessing. I mean, it is wild. They're going to announce the tariffs actually, and they'll do it before this podcast comes out, so this may be moot. But they actually moved it back so that it was after the markets close because the markets have an enormous reaction to the tariffs. But yeah, people can't predict it. It's like this thing that Trump can just do as a king. And so I'm not sure he's got some grand plan about restructuring the economy. Maybe he does, but it seems to me it's more of like a weapon for him to wield unilaterally.
Well, certainly I think it's going to be a harder thing to spin. Let's say the tariffs don't go great. We're not Liberation Day. It does not really work out. In that case, I think that'll be a harder thing to spin than say something about Signal or kind of broader democracy or norms breaking.
People ask me this question all the time, but I'm going to ask it of you. Just like, okay, there's tariffs, there's high inflation, prices are not just going down, things are getting worse. What does it take? What does it take for Trump to lose some of these people?
I mean, that's the big mystery, right? I mean, that's what we've been talking about for almost 10 years now, right? I think it is interesting that even these people who are sort of categorized as like pretty hardcore MAGA people, they aren't saying, for the most part, like, I'm putting my red hat, like, I mean, they're a little cautious about it. On the other hand, one wonders, how much of that is just kind of oppose and how much are they trying to, say wait and see, and then in a few years they'll love it. But I think probably the economy, if anything, I think would cost Trump support, it'd be the economy.
Yeah, I agree with that the economy is the one thing. I've been trying to advance this theory around getting Trump to 32% to really blunt his political efficacy and see if you can run off at least some Republicans because he hits some, new low of popularity. But that 32% is basically a number that is my estimation of the percent of people in this country who will never, ever walk away from Donald Trump, no matter how bad things get. We're in a full-on recession / depression. We're in hyperinflation. We're in stagflation. I don't know where our economy lands, but I think there are 32% of, and I think there's one of the guys in this group. He literally, you heard him talking about, he's not sexually transitioning. He's doing a career transition because he had quit his job so he could go sell Trump merchandise, which is one of the reasons he's big on a Trump third term, because he can, go back to selling Trump merchandise. And I put that guy in that kind of 32%. Like, that guy's not walking away from Donald. He doesn't like any other Republicans really, except for Trump. But I know that there are a lot of voters who went for Trump in the face of not liking Democrats, but could absolutely start saying he's doing a lousy job if the economy doesn't turn around.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly who I was going to cite as the guy that he's not going to lose, is the guy who devoted his life to selling Trump merch. But yeah, even in this hardcore MAGA group, you hear people saying, geez, I want the prices to be lower. And we know, the prices will not go lower. And so then at one point, does that messaging start to conflict?
I want to close on the state of MAGA media, which is like your world.
Yes.
And so I really want you to go on this. The names you're about to hear are just a smattering of the ones we've heard when we talk to groups, but it's not like a statistical sample. It's not like from this group, we know who everybody is listening to. But I want to have a discussion about what the MAGA audience is craving these days in terms of media. Let's listen.
I sure miss Rush Limbaugh. God rest his soul. He did show prep for everybody, but 99.9% of the time, he's right.
Anybody would be interested in seeing Tucker Carlson run?
He's a little bit narcissistic. He's kind of like mini Trump. He loves himself too damn much.
I think he's swayed too much. I remember when he used to have the bow tie and then someone made a comment and so he switched from the bow tie to the tie. It's just like, stick with the bow tie. That's your personality. That's your shtick. And so, if he can be swayed that easily about something that he loved for years, he can be swayed about anything.
He's kind of like Sean Hannity. He won't let whoever he has as a guest talk. He just overshadows them because he wants to be in the damn spotlight. I mean, shit, man, shut up. Let the guy talk.
What do you like about Rogan?
I like him. I think he tells it how it is. I don't get the feeling there's a lot of BS coming from him. I think he sees it and he talks about it. And I don't think it's, in my opinion, not non-factual. And I think he just calls the shots and he sees things clearly. I enjoy listening to him.
Same thing. He's just very plain spoken. He says it like it is to me. That's why I see him and Bongino as a little bit on the similar page personally. They seem to just throw the facts out there. It is some opinion, but they throw a lot of facts out there. I feel like you can get some truth there.
Okay. Any thoughts on Tim Pool?
Yeah, so I like him a little bit. He seems more centrist, which I'm good because gets a good perspective on things. He's a younger guy. He was a skater. So he has some interesting, youthful takes on things when it comes to all of that. And it's not necessarily like he's all about Republicans or all about Democrats. He seems to kind of stick to his guns with where he thinks. And it's like, there's too much government corruption. Let's get rid of this stuff. There's too much spending, too much BS. And so I do like that aspect about him.
If you're not familiar with Tim Pool, centrist is not a word one would use to describe this particular podcaster. All right. I have a bunch of questions, and I want to have a robust conversation about the right-wing media ecosystem, which is maybe you could just walk us through, like, how did it grow? Do some sort of scene setting first about how it emerged to be sort of the powerful force that it is.
Sure. I mean, so the right-wing media, I mean, it's sort of as we know it today, dates back, decades to, obviously, Rush Limbaugh had a big moment in the 90s with talk radio, kind of professionalizing it, nationalizing it. We think about Fox News when Roger Ailes, after Watergate, thought, we need a right-wing media apparatus that will protect future Republican presidents from scandals, and we see how that works now. So it kind of grows up outside of the mainstream media, especially after these people feel that they've been cut out of the mainstream media. They, that they're not going to be CNN hosts, and so they look for these alternative pathways. And I think with the internet, it's really gone from something Republicans tuned into in the case of talk radio, into this thing that, particularly on things like YouTube or TikTok, whatever, and podcasts, has become much more kind of like a mainstream thing for people who are extremely, I shouldn't say extremely online, but I think younger people who are getting most of their news from the internet. I listen to shows about, exercise, or you talk about Joe Rogan, which is often a show about exercise and sports, comedy, that is also sort of in a default way, a lot of these shows are also right-wing. And so there's a lot of like commingling, or it's like guys who have prank YouTube shows, but they'll also have Tucker Carlson on and talk about how much they love Zyn, like the canned nicotine. And so I think a lot of that stuff has really grown up in a digital way into much bigger operations.
All right, I'm going to advance one of my own, because I was sort of around when this, or I was coming up on, in more like traditional conservative circles as this alternative media. I mean, Fox News was around when I was like in high school and stuff. And I remember when our colleague Bill Kristol was on the Beltway Boys, and Fox News was sort of a different animal than it is right now. What are the forces? It's like, yes, the internet, but I think two things. One, the right-wing media in part happened because you said this, they felt like they couldn't get jobs at CNN. I think you would hear a lot of people on the right say they were kind of closed out of a lot of these spaces, universities, media. And so they went out and built their own things. And I do feel like the left or the Democrats now are looking around being like, oh, we need to do that. I do think, though, that one thing that might be missing in their strategy is the notion that this was like 35 years in the making. Like, this is not something that they did not build this in a day. And in fact, what happened was there was already a robust right-wing media ecosystem in the late 90s, early aughts, with Rush Limbaugh, with Fox News, that then talk radio and Fox News had to start to chase as the internet gave rise to all of these. Like Tucker, they fired him from Fox News because he was causing them real liability problems. And I think there's probably some internal stuff too. But now Tucker remains like a major media force. Like, it's not like he got run out of Fox News. Like, Bill O'Reilly got run out at a time when there wasn't such access to all of these platforms. And like, he still is around, but he's not like a big player. But Tucker still has a meaningful platform. And so talk a little bit about maybe just the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing, because the bar to start a YouTube show with sort of some nice production values is so low, that a lot of these people are leaving these media outlets. I mean, I think about, and as a result, there's a lot less gatekeeping of what is sort of treated as an acceptable topic in right-wing media. My mind goes to Ben Shapiro's operation, The Daily Wire, where Candace Owens was maybe the star next to Shapiro. Then she starts getting into anti-Semitism, attacking Israel, which is sort of a red line for Ben Shapiro. So she basically gets fired, kind of pushed out the door. She says, well, whatever, I'll start a YouTube show and compete with you, and I'll have all these ideas. I'll talk about how attacks on vaccines, stuff like that. And, she's able to thrive. I mean, I think, has surpassed The Daily Wire in some ways.
So first of all, that is one name that did not come up organically.
Yes, and wasn't that interesting?
It was that Ben Shapiro was not mentioned, which does not mean he doesn't have fans out there. But you've been discussing the state of The Daily Wire. And so I want to come back and talk about the media ecosystem a little bit more, but just specifically about The Daily Wire, because you've been really on this. Walk us through like their recent shakeup. What's going on?
Yeah, this is kind of a pet project of mine. So Ben Shapiro started this company called The Daily Wire roughly a decade ago, and it started out as sort of like a couple of YouTube shows, podcasts, and then they had these ambitions to be like conservative Netflix, the New York Times, but for conservatives. I mean, this was going to be this huge operation. Last year they claimed to have $200 million in revenue, so big deal. And then suddenly, just over the past couple months, I mean, there were some rumors, but nothing I could report. And then suddenly their CEO, Jeremy Boring, who was like a big deal, very like forward-facing guy, like he was going to be the new Rupert Murdoch. Suddenly he steps down mysteriously. They just laid off some people. Their president steps down. So there's something going on there. And beyond the sort of the drama, which I'm obviously interested in, but the larger take is, what does this mean for right-wing media's attempts to sort of go relatively mainstream, to build conservative Netflix? Is that a pipe dream at the moment, or could this really happen? What do these business problems suggest more broadly? Are there business problems? Who knows? And so I think it's interesting in that way, and also, as I mentioned, in the way that they're bleeding talent. And what does the fact that they just lost someone else, Brad Cooper, that they can leave and just start their own YouTube show with really no problems? What does that mean?
Yeah, I didn't know who she was.
She looks like Ben Shapiro's sister, and she's kind of like little Ben Shapiro.
But this is, I mean, the market incentives now. You have to sort of want to do a project like the Bulwark or the Free Press or the Daily Wire or something that requires a group of people, because the incentives sort of are pushing now toward being an individual who has the most incendiary kind of positions that, like, if you're in a group of people and everybody's decided, okay, we're going to try to be responsible in our lane of whatever, and Ben Shapiro has red lines for himself, one of them being rampant anti-Semitism, not okay. Maybe he didn't care that she was advancing the conspiracy theory that Macron, the French president's wife, is a man, but like she talks about things like that all the time. Tucker Carlson recently somehow weirdly was like, she's such a nice person and she's right about Macron's wife being a man. Okay. And like we just live in this world now. But the pressure of the incentives for people to go off on their own and be like a crazy person, but a crazy person with a lot of fans, that is really lucrative today.
And I think there's also like an authenticity to it. I mean, Ben Shapiro is a guy who wears a suit, looks very like I'm the anchor. But you can see that a lot of these people who split off and are having success are going for more of a Rogan lifestyle look. I mean, Tucker Carlson once was, wearing a suit, a bow tie, which was fascinating that they were dinging him for abandoning the bow tie. And now he's wearing, like the Patagonia vest. He's like in the cabin on his set. And in the similar way,
he's just killing bears with his bare hands. That like really seems like who he is as a human.
Yeah, exactly. And people are getting more into like on the women's side. There's also like a mix of celebrity gossip, or they're getting into like food. The word apothecary is thrown around a lot. We're kind of like this like back to nature lifestyle thing.
Again, weird ways in which things that used to be sort of more like
Yes.
lefty goop, whatever. Again, none of these things I ever followed, so I'm just not native to it. But they are the trad wife thing. All of that is becoming part of sort of influencer culture that, and this is a thesis that I have that I've been sort of saying in spaces, and I get a little pushback of it, but people used to say politics is downstream from culture. And I feel like we have hit a moment where there's no difference between politics and culture. Like they are infused, which is why we have a game show host reality star as the president of the United States.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, obviously, as you said, I mean, for so long for right-wing media, the maxim of Andrew Breitbart's politics is downstream of culture. I mean, that's why Ben Shapiro launched these. We're going to have conservative Bluey for kids. We're going to have we're going to have conservative Game of Thrones. But meanwhile, like, yeah, you listen to these shows and they just sort of reflexively they'll be talking about a UFC match and then say, can you believe this thing? But Biden's so senile, stuff like that. And so the way it all blends in together, I think has made it, politics is another sort of lifestyle choice or another entertainment option.
Is Ben Shapiro and Fox News, people who used to be extraordinarily powerful in right-wing media circles, but Ben Shapiro was like us, or it was a never Trumper for a period of time. Yeah. Of course, like many of these guys got on board for Trump 2.0 after he denied the election results and attacked the Capitol, but they got their rationalizations in order, and they got there in part because they're having to chase, right, the much more fringy elements. So how can they maintain their place in this order long term, or will they continue to bleed influence to people who are even crazier all the time, or will they just have to, like Megyn Kelly has, for example, just be like, oh, I'm going to go crazy too?
Yeah, I think probably the latter. I mean, on one hand, I think Ben Shapiro could stick with what he's doing and not start criticizing Israel. He's definitely not going to do that. But I think that's where the energy is on the right. Is certainly among young people. I think it's more anti-Semitism, more what you might call edgy content, more talk about racism, stuff like that.
Meaning saying racism is a-okay.
Yeah, or saying, well, look at these statistics, this kind of stuff. And so I think that is, probably a place where Ben Shapiro doesn't want to go, and so he's losing viewers. I mean, people like these YouTubers look at his view counts and they say it's down. I think a lot of that energy is going towards these more extreme figures. And I mean, we know like attention is equal to money these days, and so he's not able to wade into these controversies in a way sort of random successful YouTubers are.
Yeah. All right. So now I want to come back to this other question that I hear people wrestling with all the time, which is that the left is trying to build their own ecosystem that can somehow rival the right? And so as MSNBC or CNN, like they're also in a major viewership challenge because people are just moving more online. I mean, it's one of the reasons I think the Bulwark has been so successful as an independent media place. We moved into the YouTube space. We're launching podcasts. We're sort of meeting people where they are. We're doing it where we, I think are try to be authentic and trusted voices that are engaging with people in real ways that I think has changed. Like cable sort of can't make that pivot. Like they still sit. I mean, yeah, we're kind of behind a desk here, I guess today we're in the studio, but it's not like a fancy studio. That plant's fake, and so the everything is changing. Like, can Democrats rival what the right is doing? And to do that, do they also have to have their own sort of flamethrower, bombastic, like, do we just end up in a place where everybody is saying a bunch of nonsense on, like, there's no response, like, there's no media gatekeepers anymore, there's no fidelity to the truth, and everybody's just trying to convince people that the other side is trying to, like, murder them?
Unfortunately, I think that's where it's heading, right? At least for the majority of outlets. You mentioned cable trying to get kind of some of that podcast YouTube heat. I think about Will Cain, who's a Fox News host, and he launches his show with a kind of a podcasty mic like this, but he's also mic'd up, so the mic is totally fake. They're just trying to like give it kind of like that vibe.
Yeah.
And so I mean, yeah, I think that's where it's headed. I mean, is the idea of at the same time, I think for Democrats, if they want to nurture that kind of ecosystem, it's going to come with some compromises and it's going to be less buttoned up. I've talked to a few YouTubers who are kind of like culture, kind of like in the mud, guys who are in there. They're also normie Democrats, but, they want Democrats on their shows. But Democrats, I think, are understandably wary because this isn't the kind of show they normally go on. Maybe some of these guys have been canceled in the past. These are not sort of the places they go. But at the same time, Republicans had to get over, and Trump helped with a lot of that. They had to get over, I'm going to go on the Joe Rogan show. I'm going to go on Alex Jones.
But they got comfortable with Alex Jones. I mean, man, and he comes up in the focus groups, and Candace, she comes up in the focus groups. She comes up often too where you're like, oh, who would you like to see run for president on the Republican side? Which maybe is another part of this that we could just talk about briefly, which is how because you heard a lot of people in this group and every group, they always say the same phrase about why they like Trump. He's not a regular politician. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that increasingly the pool of talent that will be considered for elected office are going to come more and more from this media ecosystem, certainly on the right, potentially on the left, as they start to have more of an influence culture of their own. Does that sound right?
I think that's absolutely right. On one hand, I thought it was interesting how much the group was not interested in Tucker Carlson. I don't know if he's still there's sort of a natural distaste for the media broadly that transfers to him, and they see him as still a media guy. But I think the idea of someone who sort of mixes it up, I wonder if you ask them, Dana White, of the head of UFC, what would you think of him running for president? Maybe it would be more positive. I think the idea of I think there's such a craving right now for successful communicators and people especially who are not in a real media mold. And I think you certainly see Democrats more open to that idea as well, as maybe Mark Cuban should run, something like that.
I got a lot of curious Cuban curious Dems in the focus groups these days, which is a little bit of a function of Democrats saying that they don't think a black person or a woman or Pete Buttigieg can win. And so now they're like, who is the straightest, whitest, not a politician, comfortable with the media person? And on the Dem side, I think there's not a lot of places to look for that. I think Democrats, this is just my 2 cents, they should tread carefully on this idea because some of their most dynamic communicators are women, black people, and Pete Buttigieg. Mm-hmm. But it's just true that the right is cultivating a massive bench of talent, I'll use that advisedly, but certainly people for whom communicating. So for example, I would say Megyn Kelly, mm-hmm. easily somebody who could run for political office and win. If you said who's the most likely person to be the first female president, it isn't Nikki Haley. I think it would be somebody like Megyn Kelly. And she's an interesting one to me, actually, because it's a real classic case of sort of the abused becoming the abuser. It's like she internalized Trump. humiliated her at that debate, said she had blood coming from her eyes, coming from her wherever, went after her for asking him a tough question as a moderator. He pushes Fox around a lot when they don't do what he likes. But then she sort of turns around now and she has made sort of trans issues and going after people like Sarah McBride, but also just in general. She is nasty online. She's cruel. She's mean. And that's like her vibe. I don't care if Trump is a sexual assaulter. I care about, I think she was saying, are we getting illegal immigrants out of the country or something? Mm-hmm. But what do you think? Do you think, I don't know, can the left, I can name and go through so many right-wing podcasters and influencers, including just kind of a casual manosphere that code right-wing or sort of red-pilled. They're nothing like Republicans, but they code right-wing, which is why I think people might need to dispense with, there's this line and this spectrum, and it's like right and left and center right and center left. It's much different than that now. Like Joe Rogan is right-wing, but bears no resemblance to a Republican Party or ethos.
Yeah, and certainly I think what people like about him often is that he is not, just now he's complaining about the deportations to El Salvador. And so he's not tied into a broader right-wing media infrastructure or sort of like or a political system either. But it's interesting the bleed in the other direction where I have some baby boomers, members of my family who are very hardcore Republicans, and now they love Theo Vaughn. I mean, just these things you would never think about. And so in that way, I think this is all kind of congealing into this broader...
They're baby boomers who love Theo Vaughn.
And Joe Rogan. And yeah, they're...
So every time I try to kind of tap into one of these shows, because here's the thing about Theo Vaughn. All right, I'm going to make an admission. I'm going to look right at the camera and I'm going to tell you guys something. I still watch the Real World Road Rules Challenge. And I have watched every episode that has ever been made of Road Rules, of Real World, of that entire franchise. I remember Theo Vaughn when he was like early 20-something who shaved his chest and now he's like this hairy guy to show. These shows are unwatchable as far as I'm concerned. Like, Joe Rogan sits there and he's like, who do you think would win between a gorilla and a shark? And talks about it for like 2 hours. And I'm like, what? How can somebody sit through this? But these shows are wildly popular and they have melted the brains of, they told us this the cable news and the right-wing media ecosystem did to the boomers what they said video games were going to do to us, but we're fine. They've all gone crazy. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, it's funny you say that, and I think this is sort of such a hard dynamic for Democrats to replicate because, like, I recently listened to a lot of Rogan and Theo Vaughn for my newsletter, and I was just like, what is happening to me? I've listened to 3 episodes of this, and I'm just like, geez, Louise, hurry it up, man, and yet obviously they have extremely passionate audiences, and so how do you get someone who is so? I mean, it has to be something natural. I think something that's like, where do we get liberal Joe Rogan? But it has to be someone, I think, with an established audience who can do this in an organic way. And it's not really obvious to me who that is.
Okay, so I just want to take this the other direction in terms of one of the things that when people say, well, we need sort of a democratic set of influencers and media ecosystem that is the same. I'm like, okay, and there's a lot of people, I think, philanthropically who are trying to figure out, like, how could they invest in that? How could they help build that? And I'm like, okay, well, you guys are going to need a demand side first. And I wonder if the demand side among Democrats is there in the same way the demand side has been created among Republicans. And I don't know, and maybe this is a tough question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there something now different in the DNA between, let's just say, the right and the left, understanding what I said about the scrambled lines, that make the right more like attracted to this type of content in a way that, I don't know, are Democrats, this is maybe a little bit overly mean, but like maybe Democrats are still reading books and Republicans are like, well, I'm going to spend 3 hours hanging out with Joe Rogan. And also like sometimes I think about, especially men, the loneliness factor that leads them to be like, well, Joe Rogan's like who I hang out with for 3 hours. Like they can do it because it mimics sitting around and BSing with your friends. And instead of doing that in real life, they're doing it with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for narrowing it down because often what we're talking about with these podcasts is men specifically. And so I think the challenge is a lot of these sort of male activities, traditionally male activities, are sort of coding right wing at the moment. And so things like video games, I think about like Twitch streamers, sports. And so as a result, I think it's kind of bringing people into this already sort of right-wing coded world. I remember like roughly a year ago, I was watching just some like video game YouTuber who then casually was like, all right, like let's look how stupid Biden is. And I thought, ooh, yikes, that this is becoming kind of part of that fare and that presumably roughly apolitical people are consuming.
Yeah, I think apolitical is the key. And you heard that in the groups. People talk about this all the time. And someone said it specifically, word for word, they said, the thing about Joe Rogan is he kind of transcends politics, right? They don't even see a lot of these people, because it's true, right? That idea of like, well, Republicans stand for this and Democrats stand for this is like bleeding away. And it's a little more right-wing, red-pilled, I don't like either side, but I like this person. And they like that. And that's Trump for them, too, that he transcends politics, that he doesn't actually, it was Trump they were talking about on the show. It wasn't Rogan. They were saying they feel like Trump kind of transcends politics. This person was arguing. And I think that that's right. I think Trump both resulted from and then really accelerated like a breakdown of there being a linear political spectrum and like something really clear and understandable and defined about the parties, and became much more, that's why it is more of a cult of personality, but also it's a vibe, it's a culture, which I think makes the left now, which does still have sort of a coherent set of policies that it's trying to advance, but doesn't know how to talk about sort of normal policy stuff in the face of an entire sort of cultural upheaval. I don't know. How do you think this plays out?
Well, it's interesting. As you said, I mean, this comes up again and again in the focus groups, is people just kind of like hating the concept of politics or politics pre-Trump. And it's not even necessarily that they're such hardcore Trump people, but it's this idea that Trump's going to cut through the politics. There's this kind of like amorphous politics that is causing all the problems. And if we only had someone who, sort of ruled by fiat, perhaps, is maybe the end game there. I don't think we're going back to any kind of like traditional politics anytime soon. We talked about the kind of desire from Democrats for like their own Trumpian figure, but I guess in a positive way, someone who could, be a little more agile with the messaging in that way, or sort of like constantly be shifting without losing support. And so I do think that's where we're headed. Certainly some what we would think of as non-traditional political figures.
Okay, Will Sommer, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Bulwark, and thanks to all of you for listening to another episode of the Focus Group Podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. We will see you all next week. Bye-bye.